r/Nosleep. Posted by Reddit user Mammoth401. The funeral home I work at has a strange list of rules. Part 3. Life and death at the Mullins funeral home are beyond peculiar. My name is Jason, and I work at the Mullins funeral home. It's a small, tiny, family-owned parlor in upstate New York. We deal with very bizarre clientele, those who desire a special funeral experience. The nature of my employment is bizarre, to say the least. In exchange for my services, I'm given room and board, training, a small salary, and the adventure of a lifetime. Sounds like a good deal, right? But there's a catch. The Mullins funeral home once operated under a list of 9 rules. This list has since expanded to include one more, following a catastrophe involving the devil himself. A few nights ago, all hell literally broke loose inside the house. Gary's grandmother had shown up for a surprise visit, and I had spent the duration of her visit on the staircase, waiting for her to leave. This wasn't the greatest idea, because while I was waiting, I lost track of time. Before I knew it, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and Uncle Bartholomew started making his nightly rounds through the house. Unfortunately, I didn't notice this till the least opportune time, when he was making it down the staircase, heading directly towards me. I couldn't see anything at all, on account of every light in the house being blown. Going downstairs was not an option, lest I run into Gary's grandmother. I decided that I would take my chances with Bartholomew. As I crept up the stairs blindly, I felt myself run into something solid. Before I knew what was going on, I found myself lifted off my feet and held inches away from a hideously decayed face. The state of the decay was so advanced that the lower mandible was falling off. The eye sockets were long empty, and the teeth cracked and twisted. Uncle Bartholomew, shit, I thought to myself. I tried to let out a cry for help, but before I could, Bartholomew smothered me with his other hand. The scent and taste of his long-dead flesh was indescribably vile. He then dragged me down the hall without saying a word. My body froze, as I thought to just give up all hope. There wasn't a damn thing I could do. As much as I wanted to scream and fight back, I realized that doing so would only draw the attention of Gary's grandmother, who was most likely right below me. I don't know why, but I knew that wasn't a wise idea. Dread set in upon realizing that I couldn't even defend myself from my abductor without risking detection. I knew he would most likely maul me to death and go back to roaming the halls. The thought of my broken body lying crumpled in a corner raced through my mind. And then, something unexpected happened. Bartholomew continued down the hallway, opened my bedroom door, and then gently placed me on my floor, and started uttering complete gibberish to me. I couldn't understand much of anything he was trying to say, considering his advanced state of decay. He had half a jaw, a nub of a tongue, and destroyed teeth, but he frantically tried to speak. To my surprise, what I could make out didn't scare me. In fact, it gave me hope.
Must hide the here for brother,
he muttered, his jaw nearly falling apart the entire time. What do you mean, here for brother? I thought to myself in astonishment. My immediate thought was that Gary was in some kind of danger. Was he too going to be cursed like Bartholomew, to roam the halls and rot for eternity? I couldn't let that happen. No one deserves fate like that. I sat in my room in stunned silence for several hours. I needed to devise a plan to get downstairs and help Gary, but Bartholomew continued to stand outside my door, as if he was a watchdog. He was nearly 7 feet tall, and as wide as my door frame. There was no way I could get past him. I could hear muffled conversation coming from the room below me, but it didn't sound as if anything bad was happening. Instead, I heard what sounded like soft whispers of agreement. To my surprise, I heard 3 voices. Had Gary convinced her to leave? Was this a legitimately friendly visit? Who was the 3rd person? I hadn't the faintest idea, but I still needed to get down there. Gary seemed genuinely terrified of his grandmother's arrival. I couldn't let him face her alone. Fortunately for me, Bartholomew only roamed the halls between certain times, and eventually his footsteps moved away from my door. Now was the time to act. I crept from my bedroom and down the stairs into the parlor. I hid behind a corner and craned my neck to see Gary, sitting at a table dimly lit by candlelight. He was with someone. The man I answered the door for earlier in the evening. The devil. I couldn't believe my eyes as I snuck around the corner and hid behind a chair. Sitting in a chair next to Satan was a grotesque, human-like figure. That thing must be Gary's grandmother. Now I understand why he avoids her, I thought to myself, feeling completely sickened. It was a nude female figure who appeared to be ancient, her back hunched to a sickening degree, her skin sagging almost to the floor. She had long, graying hair that dropped at least a meter around her on the floor. In her hand she held an old tome, appearing to be bound to her human flesh, considering the cover was a literal human face. None of this can be real, I thought to myself, while trying not to vomit at the disgusting sights I was seeing. I laid in a prone position for the next few moments as I tried to decide what my next move would be. But I found myself unable to think on account of the broken glass that littered the floor, sinking into my flesh. As I laid on the floor wincing in pain, I heard Gary speak. The house always needs an undertaker, but I do not think the boy is ready yet. My hair stood on end. A sharp chill shot down my spine as he spoke. I knew that he was talking about me. The figure I knew as the devil spoke next. Your family's out of time, Mr. Mullins. The deal was all of those in your bloodline. That includes you, despite your best efforts to elongate your life and avoid me. The time is now, my boy, the deformed woman hissed as she gently placed the skin-bound time onto the table. The boy deserves to know, Gary said in a weary voice. So be it. Fetch him for me, Agatha, said the devil, as he pointed directly towards my hiding spot. My heart dropped. He knew where I had been hiding the entire time. With astounding speed, the deformed woman crawled towards me on all fours before grabbing me by the ankle. She dragged me towards the table as I kicked and screamed the entire time. Satan sat there, staring at my helpless form, with a twisted grin on his face. He handed Gary a long obsidian-looking dagger, which he pulled from his coat. I begged for my life, but it was no use. The crooked woman did not release me, and the devil laughed at my panic before saying, Boy, this isn't for you. He handed the knife to Gary, who turned to me and spoke. Jason, my dear boy, the home always needs an undertaker. I've cheated death long enough. The book on the table flew open by itself. There was a dark energy that radiated from it, as if it held all the secrets of the world. Jason, as I've told you so many times, in life only 2 things are certain: death and taxes. Unfortunately, we can only avoid one. Gary said, Son, you can't cheat the devil. Agatha here made a deal with me so many years ago. The souls of her entire bloodline for a man she loved. I gave this to her, but with a twist. Those who live in this house will always live on, even in death, Lucifer said, in a calm voice. Agatha begged in a raspy tone. Please, boy, let my family rest now. The sound of weeping filled the house. But for the first time, it wasn't coming from Scary Mary. It was my own. Gary had been the only father figure I'd ever known, and I was now being told that he had to go back to hell with Satan and his grandmother.
The house always needs a curator, Jason,
Gary solemnly said, as he placed the blade against his hand and carved into the flesh. He placed his hand into the book, and the house shook violently once again as his blood seeped into the pages. The shattered glass on the floor floated in the air, and the lights repaired themselves. Actually, all the damage caused by the day's events began to undo itself.
Just one more thing to take care of, son,
Satan said, as he turned to me, the vile tome in one outstretched hand, and the glistening black dagger in the other. It was then I knew exactly what I had to do, and thus, Rule 10 was born. The home always needs a curator.